Welcome into NFL Daily. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today, we're going to piss some people off here. 5 NFL teams that I think are going to be worse than you think heading into the 2025 NFL season. Before we get into my hot takes here today, make sure you go follow me on X for more NFL content for free at Jack_Sperry. I'm going to be putting out my top 40 quarterbacks list here in the weeks to come. So if you guys want access to that, as well as other in-depth football analysis on my X account, you can find me at Jack_Sperry. Greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. So we'll start with kind of the spiciest one here, and we're going to go with last year's Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagles, as a team that I think will be worse than a lot of people are expecting heading into this season. And kind of the crux of my argument here, guys, is I have a bad feeling about Saquon Barkley heading into 2025. Not only is he getting older, he's 28 years old, but he also has an injury history. And if you know anything about the history of rushing leaders in the National Football League and running backs that get a lot of work in a previous season, they rarely follow up with a season just as good. They usually have a regression the following year, or they get hurt, and as a result, the production's just not there the year after they lead the league in rushing. We can take a look at the last several here. Just look at a couple of examples. Derrick Henry led the league in rushing in 2020 with over 2,000 yards. The next year, he didn't even crack 1,000, dealt with injuries that year. Then Jonathan Taylor the next year had over 1,800 yards in that season there where he led the league in rushing. Once again, another guy that didn't even crack 1,000 yards the next year. Then you get Josh Jacobs with the Las Vegas Raiders, over 1,600 yards rushing, led the league that year. Once again, less than 1,000 yards rushing the following year with the Las Vegas Raiders, ends up having to leave for the Green Bay Packers the following season. And then Christian McCaffrey, 2 seasons ago in 2023, led the league in rushing with over 1,400 yards, and then he put more on top of that as a receiver. Last year, dealt with injuries with just over 200 yards. So usually, putting a season together the way that Saquon Barkley did last year puts a lot of wear and tear on the body, and it leaves you more susceptible to injuries and regression the following year. And then Saquon, specifically, has an injury history. Earlier on in his career, the injury bug bit him more than once, and, he is 28, so he is getting older as well, and he is approaching that benchmark of 30 years old where running backs tend to fall off a cliff. So, after Saquon as well, if he gets hurt, if he regresses heavily this year, Philly is honestly pretty light at running back. They did bring in A.J. Dillon this offseason. He's a good power back, but if Saquon goes down, do you really trust Will Shipley, a second-year running back, to take over number one running back duties and be just as effective as you would expect Saquon Barkley to be? That would definitely be a dubious proposition to me. And guys, at the end of the day, I think that if Saquon Barkley regresses or if he gets injured the way that the last several rushing leaders in the National Football League have over the last several seasons, the Eagles are going to regress. Sure, they're going to have a good defense. I fully expect them to be back to playing that elite caliber of defense, and I do think they'll have a good football team, and they'll probably end up making the playoffs. But in terms of winning the Super Bowl and being a repeat champion, I think that they need Saquon Barkley to have a similar level of play this season and close out games in the fourth quarter the way he was last year, and I don't expect him to do that this year. My prediction is actually that I think the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels are going to take the NFC East. If you know anything about the history of the NFC East, they never have repeat champions, and I think that the Washington Commanders are an up-and-coming team. They added Deebo Samuel this offseason and Laramie Tunsil. They drafted Josh Connerly Jr., a really good offensive tackle as well, so their offensive line is much better than it was last season. Jaden Daniels, in the second year of Cliff Kingsbury's offense, I think is going to be even more comfortable this year. Their secondary is a lot better than it was last season, and they made the NFC Championship game just last year. So I think the Eagles are going to get worse this year. I think the Commanders will be better, and I think at the end of the day, the Eagles will be a lot worse than a lot of people are expecting. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. Who's going to win the NFC East this year? Type DAL for Dallas Cowboys, WAS for the Washington Commanders, PHI for the Philadelphia Eagles, or NYG for the New York Football Giants. This will be the pinned comment on today's show, so YouTube's going to throw an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. When that happens, take advantage of that time by letting me know who you think wins this division this year. Another team that I think will be worse this year than they were last year for sure, and probably worse than a lot of people think, is the Detroit Lions. Now, I do think, Detroit losing both of their coordinators, in Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, I think it's going to make a pretty big impact here, because Dan Campbell is a fantastic CEO type of head coach, and he's got a fantastic team culture, and I don't think the Lions are going to be terrible, but as we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles with their first Super Bowl appearance under head coach Nick Sirianni a couple of years ago, they lost both of their coordinators, and, especially if you're hiring from within, it's not fantastic. And, I think that losing Ben Johnson, who in my opinion is a top 5 offensive play caller in the game today, to the Chicago Bears, is going to be big for this football team. And, they still got talent. Jared Goff's still a good quarterback. They got a really good offensive line and a pair of really good running backs. They got some good weapons as well. I don't think, John Morton is necessarily going to do a bad job as the new offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, but I don't think he's going to bring the same level of creativity and ingenuity that Ben Johnson brought to this team and really made them the best offense in football over the last several seasons. And I do want to make clear here, I don't think Detroit's going to suck or anything like that. I do think that they will for sure compete for a playoff spot. They'll probably end up making the playoffs, but number 1 seed in the NFC and winning 15 games like they did last year, I don't think that that's going to be something that they do this season. I think they will take a step back. I don't necessarily consider them, the number 1 team in the NFC heading into the year or anything like that. But I do think they will be fine with a little bit of a regression this year. So coming up here, I got 3 more teams that I think are going to be worse this year than probably you think they're going to be this year in the National Football League. But before we get into the rest of today's video, you guys can check out our friends at Fanatics, where you guys can get a stylish polo for your favorite NFL team on their website right now for 60% off. If you're planning on going to, say, your favorite team's training camp this year, you want to be looking fresh when you're watching all your new players out there on the practice field, you can get a polo from our friends at Fanatics today when you use our link, chatsports.com/NFL polo. If you use that link, you guys can get 60% off your favorite team's polo today. They got a bunch of different colors and sizes and designs and all this different stuff that they have on the Fanatics website, so you can pick your style. Whatever your style is, they have it on the Fanatics website for you. Go to chatsports.com/NFL polo to get yours today. Then we get to another team here, now shifting to the AFC with the Cincinnati Bengals, all right? Now, the Bengals are a team where I think that a lot of, people that cover and think about and follow the National Football League, they think in terms of quarterbacks. And Joe Burrow is an elite NFL quarterback. In my opinion, he's one of the top 4 guys in the National Football League right now. And because the Bengals have Joe Burrow and they have a really good receiver in Jamar Chase and a really good number 2 receiver in T. Higgins, most people think because they're going to have a potent passing attack that they're automatically a good football team and a Super Bowl contender. But the plain simply, guys, the Bengals haven't been to the playoffs in 2 years. I know Burrow was injured 2 seasons ago for most of that season, but they had all 3 of these players last year healthy, and then they missed the playoffs. Right? Joe Burrow had an MVP caliber season with 43 touchdowns to just 9 interceptions and almost 5,000 yards passing, and it still wasn't enough to get this team into the postseason. They finished 3rd in the AFC North behind the Pittsburgh Steelers that had a bottom 10 offense in the league. So you take a look at the defensive stats here. This is really the reason why the Bengals were bad last year, guys. Their defense was absolutely atrocious. They were bottom 10 in most major categories on defense. And then the question I want to pose to you guys right now is Cincinnati's defense really that much better this year? I mean, these are the numbers that they had last year when Trey Hendrickson, their edge rusher, who might not even be on the team this year, by the way. They might end up trading him if they can't find a solution to the contract situation that he's got going on right now. He had 17.5 sacks last year. That led the National Football League, and that defense was still terrible and was the reason why they didn't make the playoffs. So especially if Hendrickson's not on this team, this defense is going to be markedly worse. And I know they have a new defensive coordinator in here from Notre Dame, but you're bringing in an unproven coordinator from college to replace Lou Anarumo. I think that's a dubious proposition here that he's going to come in here and this defense is going to be magically better, even though they didn't really make a ton of improvements to the defensive roster this year. My prediction and my guess here, guys, is once again, Cincinnati's going to finish third in the AFC North. I'm a believer in the Pittsburgh Steelers this year with Aaron Rodgers. I think once TJ Watt is healthy, and I think they will get a deal done there in Pittsburgh, that's an elite defense. And I think that with Aaron Rodgers and their new revamped run game, they're going to be at least a league average offense. And we saw last year that the Pittsburgh Steelers were a better team than the Bengals with a bad offense. I think the Steelers are better this year. And because of that, I think the Bengals probably finish third again in the AFC North. Then we get to go from the AFC North to the NFC North here with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings are a team that I do expect to win less games than they did last year. It's going to be tough to repeat that 14-win season that they had last year with Sam Darnold at quarterback. He had a phenomenal kind of breakout season under Kevin O'Connell, playing with Justin Jefferson and the like. And now J.J. McCarthy is going to be expected to come in here essentially in his rookie season to either match that or exceed that. That is the expectations in Minnesota this year, is to compete for a Super Bowl. They revamped the offensive line. They revamped the defensive line. They made a lot of very aggressive moves in free agency during the offseason, and it's their expectation that they're going to be a legitimate Super Bowl contender this year. And, I think JJ's going to be fine. I think that he's going to get an opportunity to once again be this starter in 2026. I don't think he's going to be a complete bust or anything like that, but I do think he's going to have his bumps along the way. I mean, if he's asked to throw the ball like 40-plus times in an NFL football game, he wasn't asked to do that in high school, and he wasn't asked to do that in college. I'm not sure if he's ready to take on that kind of workload in the National Football League, no matter what the surrounding cast looks like around him. I think the Vikings will be a playoff contender. They'll certainly be in the mix to make the playoffs this year. But if the expectation is Super Bowl in Minnesota, I don't think that's going to happen for J.J. McCarthy and the Purple People Eaters there. Then we get to the final team on my list here, which is the Houston Texans. Now, the crux of this argument here rests with C.J. Stroud, the quarterback, and then the offensive line, okay? Because I think the defense in Houston is actually really, really good. I really believe in DeMeco Ryans. Derek Stingley is awesome. They got a great pass rush. But plain and simply, guys, C.J. Stroud took a really big step back last year after a really impressive rookie campaign. And honestly, he was a below-average starting quarterback from a production standpoint last year for the Houston Texans. You guys can see here, part of it is that he does hold the ball for a long time. He was 39th in average time to throw last year, which led to more pressures. It certainly didn't help the offensive line, but the EPA per play, bottom 10 among starters last year. I mean, adjusted completion percentage didn't even get into the top 32. And then in terms of overall efficiency, 22nd, so that's bottom half of the league, and then bottom half in the league in big-time throw percentage as well, something he did a really good job of his rookie season. Now, the problem last year, in my opinion, for Stroud and the Texans passing attack was that he had a bad case of pocket trauma. That offensive line was just not good enough last year, and you could tell Stroud was taking that football, was taking the snap, and he was expecting pressure to get to him fast, so he just wasn't playing comfortably. And then, I think that it was a really big, point of emphasis this year for Houston to fix their offensive line, and I'm not sure if they did a good enough job this offseason. You take a look at their current situation. They don't have Laramie Tunsil anymore. They traded him away to the Washington Commanders. He was arguably the best pass-protecting left tackle in football, and you're replacing him with either Cam Robinson or Trent Brown, who's coming in here. I think that's a Band-Aid solution, and it's going to be marketably worse than what they had last year. And then Jake Andrews, hasn't taken a lot of snaps as an NFL starter. You do bring in Ariante Ursary. You do have Blake Fisher, who you drafted last year. You got some pieces here that they're hoping take another step, but it's not fantastic. And then the wide receiver position, in my opinion, is worse than what it was last year. With Stephon Diggs, who I still think is a good player, and then Tank Dell, you don't have either of those players that are going to play for you this year. I really like Nico Collins, and I like the two rookies they brought in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. I like Christian Kirk as a slot weapon. But I think that the offensive line is worse than it was last year, and the wide receiver room is worse than it was last year. So, if these things aren't improving, I think that, C.J. Stroud is not going to get, so much better. I think it's going to be closer to that second-year C.J. Stroud than what it was to that first-year C.J. Stroud this year. Now, when it comes to the AFC South, I do think the Texans will go into the season as favorites probably because the Colts, the Titans, and then the Jaguars are all unproven teams. But I think that this division is absolutely up for grabs. If the Jags, the Colts, or the Titans get a lot better this year, and, we could certainly see that happen, especially with the Jags and Titans this year, I think that this division is up for grabs if C.J. Stroud and this offense isn't able to turn it around in 2025. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. Who is the most overrated team in the NFL right now? I listed 5 of my most overrated teams on today's show. Let me know your guys' pick down there in the comments section. And that'll be it for today's edition of NFL Daily by Chat Sports. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today. We got NFL content for free on this channel every single day, so make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already for daily and free NFL content.